Tire pressure, it is critically important. Hi, this is Jim from RV4x40.com. Welcome to the channel today. We're glad you could join us. We're going to cover a safety issue this week, and it's called a tire pressure monitoring system. Of course, the tires on your vehicles are very, very important. In our case, we drive a motor coach which has 6 tires on the ground, 2 in the front, 4 in the back, and then we tow a Jeep behind us. Of course, it has 4 tires on it as well. So altogether, we have 10 tires between us and the road. And while the Jeep has its own internal system for monitoring tire pressure when you're in the Jeep, that really doesn't do us any good driving the coach down the road. And certainly if you had a tire fail on the coach, you would know it immediately. One of the problems is you could have a tire fail on the towed vehicle and never know it, especially with the diesel pulling a car. It could drag a flat tire for quite a ways, causing substantial damage to the towed vehicle and quite possibly a fire from overheating. So we've always had a tire pressure monitoring system when we've been doing this. We've been through 2 or 3 different ones. The current one we have is from Truck System Technologies, or TST as they're commonly known. And it's one we like. It's very similar to several others that are on the market, but this particular one has a very colorful display, which looks very, very nice. And we'll talk about the display in a little bit more detail later on. The important thing is to be able to monitor both the pressure and the temperatures of all 10 tires as we're driving down the road. And we had one particular situation earlier where we were towing a different Jeep, and when we set it up and started towing it and left the park, I didn't realize I had left the emergency brake slightly on. If it had been fully on and the tires wouldn't have moved, we would have caught that, but because it was only slightly on, you had the brakes in contact with the brake drums, and we had gone about 3 miles, and I didn't get a pressure warning as much as I got a temperature warning on the tires. And so we did pull over immediately and found that the tires were quite hot, and found out what the problem was, and so we were able to correct the problem and continue on. But as soon as we got back to our home base and could take it to a tire shop, I had them pull the tires, and they all smelled hot of burnt rubber. So I ended up having all 4 tires changed because I didn't want to trust them after they'd been overheated like that. So it didn't save us from an expensive problem, having all 4 tires replaced, but it did prevent us from having a terrible situation where an overheated brake drum could have easily caught fire and caught the vehicle on fire behind us and then spread into the motorhome. So I have always used these things ever since then and made sure we had one that worked. So I'm going to take you through the various screens of this particular system and talk about that and show you what you can do. I would encourage you, if you don't have a system already in place, to monitor both your towed vehicle as well as your towing vehicle. And you could have a fifth wheel trailer, and that's a different situation than ours with the motorhome or a travel trailer. But whatever you're doing, you need to be able to monitor the pressure and the temperatures in those tires. And pretty much the way they're all set up is they have a remote transmitter that you attach to the wheels, and you can get different ones between what you want to use for both the towing vehicle as well as the towed vehicle, depending on your particular application. But they will transmit a signal every few minutes. I'm not sure what the interval is, and it may vary as you're driving down the road. And so the display in the cab can show you what the pressures are, and you will watch temperatures rise a little bit, and you will watch the tire pressures in particular rise as you drive, and the tires get hotter. And you get a feel after a while for how much that's going to change. You can set warning points for both high pressure and low pressure on the tires. And so if, in our case, for example, we run different tire pressures in the front two tires versus the four rear tires. And that's based upon the rating of the tires and the manufacturer's recommended minimum tire pressures for these particular tires and our particular weights. So you can set all that information up, and we'll kind of show you some of that as we go through. But it's important to understand that and look at the recommendations for what your tire pressure should be as well as what the settings should be. And so if you have a low tire pressure, for example, you put air in the tires when it was warm, and you go to a colder climate, now the pressure is going to drop, and you can read the pressures fairly accurately and know if you need to add air or not. But more importantly, the sensors are set up to give you a warning at an absolute pressure, which is a slow leak, taking maybe several hours to get down to that point. You will get a low pressure warning at some point. The sensors also have a technique for monitoring how fast the pressure is changing, and so if you get a faster leak, you will get a warning. Also, for what it's worth, most of the sensors will go into a much higher power transmit mode. When you're just monitoring the pressure, if you miss a data point here and there, it's not terribly important. But if you're having a warning coming from the sensor, they're intelligent sensors, and they will automatically increase their transmit power and their frequency of how often they send the message to make sure you get it accurately on the display. In reality, you don't have to monitor the display as you're going down the road, because at least ours will beep at you and then bring up a particular display if you get a warning from one of the tires. And so you have to learn your system, learn how it operates, and learn how it best fits into your particular pattern. These are the screw-on caps which I use on the Jeep. I use them there because they're a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller, and so they put less stress on the tire valve coming out of your tire. The specific model that we have is a TST 501DC, which is the color display. For the sensors on the RV itself, we use what's called a flow-through sensor. That allows you to easily add air through the sensor itself without having to remove it from the tire. This is the operating display. It shows you the temperature that the sensor sees, and a point about this is that the temperature is mostly going to be the ambient temperature, particularly on the RV tires with the flow-through sensors, because they're on fairly long valve extenders and so don't see the temperature inside the tire very well. The pressure you can see is from one of the front tires, and the display will blink the yellow tire locations, be blinking on and off to show you which tire it's reporting on, and it just simply scrolls around. What you see here is a display with the front axle and the rear axle with four tires, and then the four tires on the Jeep. When you set the system up, you have a lot of options. This is really a truck system, so you can run a lot more tires if you had like an 18-wheeler on that front. And if you had a fifth wheel on the back or some other kind of trailer, you might have a different arrangement. But it has a tow vehicle and a towed vehicle display. You can also set it up for multiple vehicles if you wanted to. We don't see the need to do that in our situation. We never change the configuration. You can turn off the towed vehicle or the Jeep display if you're only driving the RV by itself, so that isn't sitting there running all the time. This is a high pressure set point. You do need to think about how much the tire pressure is going to increase going down the road. It can be substantial on these larger tires that are on the RV. The display also shows you the number of axles and tires you can monitor with this system. It's a truck system, so it's quite extensive in the number of tires that you can set. You want to have a low pressure set point, and this will vary by axle because the tire pressures on the RV vary by axle. It's the same for both axles on the towed vehicle. And so this is a low pressure set point. Again, this would be for our front axle. And you can set a different high temperature monitor point. There is no low temperature, and we just leave that one set to the default setting that comes from the factory. Didn't see any reason to change that. It seems to be a reasonable number. You also have some choices, particularly if you're not in the U.S. and you're used to different measurement systems. You can set it for a bar reading or a PSI reading. And you also have a choice between degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Celsius. You can set a truck ID. I mentioned earlier that you can have multiple trucks and multiple trailers, so you can set IDs up and have a system where if you moved it between different vehicles, different configurations, you could just change the settings and I have to redo all the individuals. So for that is also true for the trailer. Well, I hope you learned something from looking through those various screens of our particular system. A couple of comments about the particular system we have, and while their display is extremely pretty and it actually photographs fairly well, I did find a couple of limitations with it which I think are worth mentioning just so you're aware of them. One of which is the blue color that they use looks great and pretty in lower light situations, but blue is a fairly hard color to see if you're in brighter ambient light. So the display is not as useful as it like to be. It takes a little bit longer to look at it and see what the numbers are saying because of that blue color. Wish they had picked something different. The other issue with their display is there's a thing called a viewing angle with thick film displays. And if you're going to put the thing on the dash, you would typically be looking at the display from a slightly downward angle because your head's higher than where the display is. And it turns out this particular display tends to wash out quite a bit when looked at from a top-down angle. It is actually brighter if you look at it slightly below the thing, looking up at it as an angle, which really doesn't lend itself very well to be sitting on a dashboard. So consider that if you're having trouble seeing the display, changing the angle to it can make a big difference in the contrast levels that you see and how easy it is to view the display. Overall, we like the system. It's been good for us. The batteries in the monitors are changeable, and we typically get a year, a little bit more out of the monitors. I don't bother to take them off of the tow vehicle because we're on the road enough. I just don't want to mess with taking sensors off and putting them back on. They don't do anything when we're not behind the tow vehicle, but I just don't worry about it. The batteries aren't expensive and they aren't hard to change. So that's my particular option. I know some people will pull the batteries off of their towed vehicle when they're not needing that particular tire pressure monitoring system, but that's something we just choose not to do, and you can have your own choice about that. Thanks for watching us. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, we would appreciate it if you would do that. Click on the subscribe button down below, and then the bell icon will notify you when we post a new video. In the meantime, we hope that you're having a great day, and we hope you're enjoying life as we travel around as we can with COVID-19. But we will see you on the highways and byways of America as time goes by.